So let's talk about one of the biggest issues that comes up when it comes to homeschooling. This meme is a great example of that, and I'm going to show you a bunch of memes in this video about this topic. But as you're going to see, it also is a bit of a serious conversation. So maybe your kids are smart, they're well spoken and friendly, but then if it turns out you homeschool, there's this concern about socialization, and if you've been around for a while, then I'm sure you've heard this concern. It may be the biggest argument against homeschooling. Um, Almost as if it's impossible to homeschool and also have socially well adjusted kids. As if all the kids who come out of public school are socially well adjusted. Not exactly. Or also as if we as parents who care more about our kids than anyone, as if we somehow just forgot about this basic need of theirs. I think really it comes down to definitions. So we're going to talk about what homeschooling is and what it isn't. And then also talk about socialization and what exactly that is and what it isn't. So, firstly, homeschooling doesn't mean no interactions with outsiders, so to speak. It doesn't mean you have no friends. um, Homeschooling isn't the solitary handling unit, or the shoe as it's called. That's why it's not called homeschooling. It's called homeschooling. Um, Homeschooling your kids doesn't mean that your family lives in a cave. So um, there are four big values that homeschooling parents generally have, and I want to show those to you in relation to talking about socialization. So, firstly, generally speaking, homeschooling families value socialization, yes, but we don't just value random, non intentional socialization, we value intentional friendships and social experiences. So that means we want to have control of who our kids are exposed to, who our kids are friends with, because your kids will not just become like their friends. Your kids will basically become their friends. That is the norm, and that's why this is important to us. It also means that we don't socialize for socialization's sake. It means we socialize intentionally with goals in mind. We want to create quality experiences for our kids, with other kids and other families. So this is in sharp contrast with basically just forcing a bunch of kids to hang out together in unnatural settings when they might not even want to. That's forced association. That is not socialization. Um, that's This homeschooling approach is versus dumping kids together with no intentionality, no parental involvement. That's actually a little more like Lord of the Flies, bunch of kids stranded on a deserted island kind of scenario. And as you know, that didn't end well. I think you could even argue that homeschoolers in general get a better experience of socialization. So while the world thinks this, and the two I want to point out to you specifically is the top middle one, what the neighbors think I do, yeah, kids in a cage, and then top right, what public schools think I do. Oh no, I forgot to socialize the kids. Or sometimes, well, people may think it's kind of like this, kids who go to school, they're like all together and all swimming along happily, and the poor homeschooled kid is just at home by himself in the fishbowl. The reality is that homeschooling is more like this in the bottom right. It's more like swimming free in more natural environments, in the real world. And when you see the parallels between schools and prisons, which I'm going to show you shortly, then I think you'll really begin to suspect what the real cage is. But as you can see from this picture, this really is a great picture. There's fishies swimming around in their at home, well, in natural settings. And I would say that is the second value of homeschooling. Real world learning experiences, getting a real world education. The fact is that the classroom isn't the real world. And so if you're accustomed to the classroom, then you're going to have to adjust to the real world when your schooling years are over. The real world is not, it's not inside the classroom, it's outside the classroom. And so this is a homeschooling approach, that real world experiences at home and outside the home they're all school. They're all part of school, and not just like in a random accidental way either, in a mindful and intentional way. The reality is that until recently, everyone homeschooled. There was no such thing as government schools. So, Jesus's parents, George Washington's parents, they homeschooled him. The reality is that the homeschooling isn't an experiment. Homeschooling was the norm for hundreds, thousands of years. Government schooling is the experiment. And I think you could make a pretty strong case for the possibility that that experiment is actually failing, and that it has been for decades. Why? Why would it be failing? Well, maybe because the classroom isn't the real world. Because it's not healthy. I'll read this because it's a little long. Did you know that kids in North America are forced to sit in classrooms all day, and if they move around, get excited, or make too much noise, they're given drugs to keep them quiet? Their main source of exercise is playing video games, and most of their food is fake and full of dangerous chemicals. That's terrible. We should take up donations for them. Unfortunately, that is often the reality. And the homeschooling approach is totally different. We don't do that here. So if you're familiar with the house church movement, believers getting together in homes, trying to do church more like the early church, there's an expression in the house church movement that it isn't "Honey, I Shrunk the Church." So if you do house church, you're not just taking the program church service and then shrinking it and doing that in the living room. It's a totally different approach to community, to gathering as disciples, to what you do when you gather, the underlying principles. One example, Paul talked in 1 Corinthians 12-14 about believers gathering and everyone is participating. They're moving in the Holy Spirit and their individual spiritual gifts. Guess what? You can't do that in most church services because they're programmed, they're canned, and they're controlled from the front. And you just have too many people for everybody to be able to do anything other than just sit there passively. All right, so you take that approach, and that is true of homeschooling also. Homeschool isn't "Honey, I Shrunk the School." It's a totally different approach to raising kids and to educating your kids and preparing them for real life in the real world. The reality is that peer groups are fake. The classroom school environment, it's fake. How can you learn to interact with the world if you're limited to seeing 20 kids your exact same age all day, every day? That's one of the strengths of homeschooling. You grow up without this fake peer group mentality. You see everyone just for the people they are, and you can have a conversation with an adult just like you can with somebody closer to your own age. Another strength of homeschooling is those family relationships. I'll read this because it's a little small. It says, next time someone asks about socialization, remember, if we can get along with family, we can get along with anyone. And I really do think that's true. Boundaries work happens at home in families. And if you can have healthy relationships at home with your family members, then you're set for life, because it means that when you grow up, you'll also be able to have healthy relationships, and you'll go on to hopefully have a healthy family of your own. You're most likely to grow up with a secure style of attachment if you grow up in a home setting with your family that way. The reality is most families spend very little time together. And you might think that's not that important, or maybe have an assumption to that effect, but just think for a second about 2020. Remember the COVID pandemic? Remember the lockdowns? Remember when people had to stay home because of quarantine? That was a wake-up call for a lot of people, because it didn't take very long before families realized that they didn't really know each other, and they didn't really know how to get along together very well. And that only got worse as the days dragged on for many people. It was just, a very, very, and that was one of the things that made it an even harder time for many people, is when you have dysfunctional families and you're all out there at work and at school and you barely talk to each other. Well, you can kind of live in the same house, but when you have none of that and you're just at home together all day, every day, then that dysfunction, you really begin to feel it, unless that's your norm. Which was the case for a lot of homeschooling families. For a lot of us, quarantine wasn't actually much different than how we already lived our lives. So one of the big questions is, when it comes to socialization, is what's your goal? Like, what is the goal of school? Is the primary goal sending kids to school so they can hang out with their friends? Or is the primary goal of school learning, getting an education, not socialization? Because if the primary goal of school is learning and getting an education, then why is socialization such a big worry? It's funny. Like, they talk about socialization in dog training. Maybe that's not what kids need so much. Maybe there's something to this. Education and socialization are two separate things. And of course, we want our kids to have good friends and to have wonderful social experiences. But is it possible that actually happens more often and in better ways when the parents are involved and helping to be intentional and plan for those interactions and for those friendships? All right, the third value of homeschooling that really comes into this socialization question is authenticity. It's one of the goals of homeschooling, I would say. Just like one of our goals is getting a real world education and having real world relationships, we also want our kids to be real. We want to encourage them to be their real selves. And if you don't want your kids to grow up fake, then you need to give them that freedom. You need to encourage them with that. And you know what? Maybe people can say, well, that can happen at school. But the reality is that kids are pressured at school to conform. And if they don't fit in, they are ostracized and they are punished with behaviors like bullying, being excluded, being talked about in negative ways. That is the reality of it. Your kid is not free to be his or herself in public school settings, in the same way that they are free to be themselves at home with their families who know them and love them and mostly accept them. Homeschooled kids aren't so great at raising their hands before speaking, not so great at standing in straight, tidy little lines, or maybe even making a circle. But what homeschoolers are good at is being themselves, being free, thinking for themselves. Homeschoolers aren't afraid to stand out and not fit in, because they're authentic, they're themselves, and because that's all they've ever known. All they've ever known is freedom and being themselves. Homeschool parents, we want to raise our own children. We don't want to pass that off to the government or other people. We've seen The Village, and maybe that's not what we actually want our kids to grow up to be like. This is a little bit hard to read, so I'll read it for you, but it really supports the argument that kids are not free to be themselves in school settings. How do you teach your kids to be social? I lock them up for 8 hours, make fun of their clothes, push them into lockers, tease them for not conforming, and then give them an iPad so when we go out, they don't have to interact with anyone. So, some of us, we don't actually want to fit in with that. We don't want our kids to fit in with that either. The statistical reality is there are an increasing number of kids on medications and showing unhealthy behaviors at increasingly younger ages. And our goal is to raise kids who will be authentic, who aren't afraid to stand out. They're not conformists, and they don't really care if they fit in or not. Freedom is really what that is, and freedom is the fourth value that I wanted to talk about in relation to this concern about homeschooled kids getting socialized. Homeschooled parents want the freedom to raise their kids the way they want to, teach them what they want, and not be told what to do by the government or by any other group with an agenda. There's an interesting parallel between the Department of Education and the Department of Corrections. And why don't we look at that together here? Yes, some of this is simply because you're dealing with a lot of people and you want to be efficient. But I wonder if there might be something deeper there also. Take a look at these comparisons. These two look very similar, but one is school and one is prison. Or maybe, are they the same place? Dun, dun, dun. Okay. Not only that, here you can see security checks, outdoor areas, sports. They're the same picture, prison and public school. School is prison with brighter colors. Okay, the hallways are a little bit different. People don't usually get locked up in their lockers, unlike jail. I don't even know if one is, the school lockers might be a little bit brighter here, yeah. School buses are brighter. Here the cafeteria is brighter. Food-wise, in these two pictures, they look about the same. Outdoor sports areas, okay, you have some trees in the bottom. Outdoor area in general, that's a bit of a toss-up. Maybe there's a reason that kids feel like school is prison. Maybe even like they feel like it's the ultimate prison. Maybe there is a reason for that. Maybe it's because maybe there's something to that versus just, gaslighting kids' feelings why they feel like that. Maybe it's time to consider the possibility that there's a reason that they feel like that. This made me laugh. I never referred to public school kids as inmates, but it's you might want to be careful about that. You might also want to be careful about this now that you've been enlightened. Be careful how you talk about school and all of these things that you just saw. Okay, or you're gonna sound a little cray. When someone asks, how can you homeschool if you're not a teacher? Not to worry, I have a permit. I can do what I want. Ron. So, we as homeschooling parents, we believe that we really are competent enough to raise and teach our kids. We believe that we've been made that way and that we are being given and we will be given the grace to do that. And that's something that we're willing to fight for. When someone asks if you're sure you feel qualified to homeschool your own kids. We value freedom for our kids, for ourselves, and we don't believe that we have to get the government's permission to do that. What if socialization was actually a front for brainwashing? Just think about that for a second. The separation of church and state means that church, i.e. God, is not welcome in government or state-run and state-funded schools. And that is the definition of a godless system. When there's no God, then it is a godless system. So government schools are a godless system. And do you really want to send your kids to that system to have it teach them about how the world is, about history, give them all the facts and the answers? Because let's face it, that's what school is there to do. It's there to teach kids, to disciple kids. And if you expect this godless system to teach and disciple your kids to be anything other than godless, well, you better be praying hard. Because, say you're homeschooled, person instantly assumes you're Christian. Well, there's probably a reason for that. Think it's probably usually true, not always, but often, I'd say, the majority of the cases, it's because we want our kids to learn religion from us. We don't want them to go to government schools where they will learn woke religion or the godless religions of evolution and secular humanism. And speaking of which, if you're wanting to impart your faith to your kids, I recommend this hymnal. The reason being, hymns are packed with faith in God, a very rich faith, and it's awesome because you don't just read these things, you sing them. And when you sing them, they really hit home. You really feel it, and you remember it. It is an incredible way of not just growing in your faith, but of hearing the gospel. The gospel is what saves us. It's what changes our hearts. It's what makes us the people that God is calling us to be. And just singing hymns with your kids is an amazing way of learning the Bible, growing in their knowledge of God, and in hearing the gospel. And you definitely learn a pretty high level of theology too. I mean, you just read the lyrics for Immortal, Invisible, God Only Wise, for instance. There is a lot of theology there. And not just kind of like cool-hearted, disconnected theology either. It's when you sing in worship to God, you're feeling, you're experiencing, you're personally knowing more of God and who He is. And man, this is something that I do with my kids regularly. It's an amazing experience, and honestly, it's something that I would love for you to have with your kids too. I will put the link to this hymnal in the video description. The website's ourhymnal.com. One of the things that you could do with your kids to help disciple them is to start a storytelling group, and not just where you treat the stories of God's word like nice little stories, but where you treat them like they're actually God's word. And you don't just go through the nice little stories that most kids hear, but you actually go through them a little more systematically. There are actually 400 stories in the Old Testament, or Tanakh as it's called in Hebrew, and 200 stories in the New Testament. How many of those stories have you actually gone through with your kids? And maybe even not just going through them and telling them or reading them, but talking about them after. And that's where our storytelling network can come in also. We have a network of storytelling groups, and we don't just get together to read or tell these stories, but we also have questions that we go through that really help people to enter into the stories, relate to them on a personal level, and also walk away with takeaways. What is the story telling you to do? So yeah, if this is something that you might be interested in, check out yeshuagroups.com, and I will put the link for that in the video description also. So those are 4 of our values as homeschoolers that make socialization something that our kids are probably getting more of and a better experience of than most kids going into other school scenarios. What resonated most with you from this conversation and from all these memes? Did I miss out on any of the big reasons that we homeschool? The big reasons why the socialization argument is so wrong? I would love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments. Go ahead and read some of the comments too, and upvote your favorites by giving it a like. Hopefully you'll also like this video. Subscribe to our channel if you want more videos like this, and definitely share this if you feel like this is a message that more people should hear and maybe really think about. Because yeah, I mean, we covered a lot of funny things here, but definitely it's also a very, very serious thing. This is our kids we're talking about. This was actually the 3rd in 6 videos about homeschooling, just packed with homeschooled memes. In our next video, we are going to make a little bit of fun of ourselves, and we're going to talk about, just a little bit, we're going to talk about how weird we actually are.